Today we've got the Element Enduro and we're going to take this chassis out of it and we're going to put this one in there. What's going on, everybody? Today we are back on the bench with the Element RC Enduro Sendero. This is the ready to run version, and up to this point you've seen me do just a handful of modifications, mainly this new rear bed section where we cut out the inner portion of that rear body and added this Proline cage. We've also changed the wheels and we've installed most of the hard plastic parts that Element offers for this truck. Today though, we're gonna go a little bit further, and what we're gonna do today is I'm going to take this truck and I'm going to attempt to swap in one of the Vanquish products VS410 chassis kits. Now the VS410 chassis and this Element chassis are actually pretty similar in a lot of ways, but there is some upgrades to the VS410 chassis that I do prefer, and I want to see if it's possible to swap it over easily onto this Element RC Enduro. So I've got a new VS410 chassis kit here, but I also have an assembled one here on the side to use as a talking point for now. The biggest question will be, why am I going to swap the chassis on a truck that has a chassis that looks pretty similar in a lot of ways? But there are a number of reasons and a number of similarities alike which make me want to do this swap. Kind of looking at the two chassis in broad strokes, they both have high clearance frame rails of a similar shape and design. They're both C-channel, both steel. They both have dual servo mounts up front, except standard post style bumpers, and the battery position is in roughly the same spot on both chassis. And with how the servos mount on top of the cross brace in the front, I think that we're actually going to be able to get a little bit more suspension travel than the Enduro has. Right now, with the servo mounted on the bottom side of this stock chassis, and with how low the pan-hard link mount gets down there, I think that that's kind of one of the limiting factors to our suspension travel. I do want to reuse the stock shocks, as they're a pretty awesome shock. One other thing that I'm hoping that we accomplish when doing this swap is decreasing the drive shaft angle on this front drive shaft specifically. It's pretty steep out of the box. It hasn't seemed to be an issue. I haven't heard it chattering or anything like that, but I think decreasing it will only help. I do plan to bolt in the Stealth X transmission that comes in the Enduro into this chassis. I've already test fit that, and I know for a fact that it will drop right in. I'm gonna bolt the transmission in the same configuration that you see it here in the stock form. One thing to note is that I actually need to open up that transmission again, because in the last video when I installed the heavier overdrive percentage, I actually installed those two gears in the wrong position. Wasn't thinking, I didn't look at the instructions, and it happens. It's one of those transmissions I'm not as familiar with, and I should have read the instructions, but I didn't. So I need to get back in there and fix that problem that I created myself. So we're gonna do that. I'm gonna make sure, and I note that in the last video referring to this, just to make sure that no one does that. One of the other things that we're going to accomplish by swapping chassis is that we're gonna change out the rock sliders to the VS410 ones, and these have a little bit smoother approach on the bottom of the slider itself, rather than the stock ones, which do have a number of lips and things like that that could grab on the rocks. This just a little bit smoother in general. And the last thing that we're gonna accomplish is that the VS410 chassis is a lot more rigid, kind of in that torsional direction. So I think that is going to be a nice upgrade over the stock version. Something else I'm going to be trying out with the Element is a couple of new battery options from Genzace. These are their Adventure series. It's something that they're targeting specifically at people who are, building trail trucks and things just like what we're working on today. They've got a 2200 milliamp 3S and a 5000 milliamp hard case 2S. Super popular sizes. 2200 milliamp, smaller, lighter weight, a little better for performance. You're not carrying around such a big battery. But if you want those long run times, the 5000 milliamp version is definitely going to last you a good chunk of the day. Comes in a hard case if you're interested in a little bit of extra protection. 2200 milliamp is probably going to be my preference as far as size and power, weight, things like that. These do come with a Dean's plug installed. So like the Element has a Dean's plug installed from the factory, so you're gonna be able to just drop these things right in. Price on these is really reasonable as well. So if you're looking to pick up a few of the 2200 milliamps, which is what I would suggest if you're gonna do, try and run all day on this size pack, I wanna have 3 or 4. If you're going for the 5000 milliamp, probably 2 will get you through most long days. Beyond just using the things that come in the chassis kit, I'm gonna try and not change anything else just to see how it goes. So I'm going to assemble the brand new chassis kit that I have here and begin the teardown on the Element. And it's complete. Just did it all at once. I didn't go through and do a how-to on this one just because I didn't really know for sure how it was all going to go. And I actually did play around with a few options here and there to come up with what we've got in front of us here. Now, I did bolt back on that stock front bumper. This thing has got to go still. I just don't have the option here yet that I want. So I still bolted it back on, and you know, it is what it is. And we are left here with most of the stock chassis from the kit. We're gonna go over all of the details that I had to kind of go through as I was actually putting this thing together. I was able to use the factory body post locations in the front, and then I actually changed some stuff up in the rear. So I actually drilled new holes, but we'll get into that. The stock links bolted right into the chassis, no problem at all. I did take and swap out the plastic rod end balls that come in these factory links and swap them out with the metal ones that are included with the VS410 chassis. They're the same size, so you don't have to swap them out, but I'd always rather have a metal pivot ball than a plastic one, so took the opportunity to swap those out at the skid plate side. But as far as links go, I used all the factory ones except for the panhard link. So the panhard link is the one thing that I did end up kind of changing around a little bit. I used the panhard link that was included with the VS410 chassis, that I actually had to put the link towards the front side of the mount. So it's not ideal, the link is not in double shear. I just used a longer screw to go all the way through both of them still and put a lock nut on the back. But the reason I had to do that is because of how the truss is on the front axle. You actually have some interference with that. But I moved it to the front side of that mount, so now I have a lot of suspension travel. I can actually use the full extent of the shocks without any interference issues anywhere on it. We're actually in really good shape. So that actually turned out fine. I get full steering throw in both directions without any clearance issues. I am using the factory Element shocks on these. One thing that I did do is I did take a little bit of material off of the front side of the molded shock towers just to make sure that it cleared this adjuster ring on the for the preload of the springs. That was one thing that was rubbing, so just kind of went in there, took a little bit of material out to make that clear nicely. I think that was the best move and is a pretty easy modification to those molded shock towers. As I mentioned, I had to open up that Stealth X transmission to swap those gear sets, but I've got that all set now, and we do have that 11% overdrive compared to the 6% that is factory. So got that fixed. That's in there now. And then moving to the rear suspension, one thing that I did back here actually is I used the Element shock towers. These bolted right onto the chassis without any hiccups, and I was able to move the shocks a little bit further forward, lay them down a little bit. It did adjust the body post position, so I had to drill a couple of new holes in this rear Proline bed, but pretty simple deal. I ended up using the factory Element body posts. Actually, they were the front versions, and I put those in the rear, nice and short. Everything worked well. Super easy. Beyond that, this was a really simple modification, you know. Installed the factory ESC, transmission motor, nothing special there. Currently, I have installed the 2200 milliamp version of that Genzace Adventure pack up front. I like the 2200 size. It's nice and compact, and it's got a Dean style plug on it, which the factory ESC in this car came installed with. And again, I really like this size. The 5000 milliamp 3S pack is in a hard case and fits nicely in the battery tray on the VS410 chassis, so if you wanted to run it, still an easy option for those longer run times. But the 2200 milliamp version, a little bit more performance oriented. The included universal sliders with the VS410 chassis are a little bit narrower than the factory sliders that came on the Enduro, so they actually sit just on the inside of the body. That might not be ideal for you depending on what look you're going for. My body's getting a little torn and trashed on the bottom, so I'm probably just going to kind of cut it at this lower body line right at the top of where those notches were on this body, and then at that time they'll be just right at that bottom level. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that I was hoping to kind of fix the pinion angles a little bit, and we did do that slightly. I can tell that I get a little bit flatter angle, but I also think that part of that is because I actually got this truck to ride a little bit lower. At full compression now, the lower links are right at level with the bottom of the skid and the parallel with the ground then. Previously, I noticed on the Enduro chassis that when you did that, it was actually still a little bit downhill, so I think that we got our ride height down just a little bit. We get a little bit more suspension travel, causing those to be able to go up a little bit higher. And with using those rear Element shock towers, we ended up laying those shocks down a little bit more. It gives us a little bit more suspension travel in the rear. Still have plenty of clearance back there. I've got probably 3/8 to a 1/2 inch still between the top of the disc diff and that rear cross member. I think the only thing left that I really want to get accomplished is replacing that front bumper. That's the only thing left, and it's a simple bolt-on situation. I just haven't chosen the one that I'm gonna use, but we'll get there. Probably gonna get there before I drive this thing next though. Overall though, this was pretty simple. I didn't really have to do anything. You know, the one thing that I did is different than, you know, just using straight out of the directions is I had to put that panhard link in the front. That was it. So that's about as simple as it gets when doing a custom chassis swap on a vehicle, especially when it wasn't just immediately specifically designed as a chassis swap for that vehicle. So on a 1 to 10 scale of difficulty, this is maybe a 3. Pretty happy with the overall outcome that we have here, and in general, I've just been pretty happy working with the Element stuff. It's got some obvious familiar traits that allow it to work with aftermarket items like the VS410 chassis, and I think that anyone who picks one of these up is going to be pretty happy with it as well. So this was a pretty simple video overall, just kind of giving you guys an update of what I'm doing with my Element Enduro Sendero. But until the next time, guys, hopefully you guys enjoyed these videos. Hit the like button if you do, subscribe if you're not already, hit the notification bell so you see the videos as soon as they get uploaded. That's all we got for this one. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.